Okay, everybody, thank you. And let's talk a little bit about. Um, Today, we're going to talk about Weber. So far, we've talked about Marx, we've talked about Durkheim. Um, Now, we're going to talk about Weber. Uh, the If you read it and you look at it, it's going to look like Max Weber, um, but he was born a German, died a German, wrote in German, so we call him Max Weber. And I used to have a professor when I was a kid in school who, by the end of the semester, his hair is growing out like this. He was bald on top, and his beard got all unruly and white. And some poor kid would say something about Max Weber in a nice Minnesota accent, and the professor would slide his glasses, and he'd say, "It's Weber." So props to Dr. Alvarez. We're going to call him Max Weber. So I also said at the beginning of the semester that you've got the holy trinity of theories, and there's an important distinction that we need to make here. So the holy trinity of is theories is conflict theory, which goes with Marx, functionalist theory, which goes with Durkheim, and then symbolic interaction. Now, the thing about symbolic interaction is it goes with somebody else, not Weber. So that means that the holy trinity of theorists is Marx, who goes with conflict theory, Durkheim, who goes with functional theory, and Weber, who is kind of his own thing, which is fine. It's just kind of helps me to remember what we're trying to talk about when we think of it that way. Okay, so Weber. There are a couple of points with Weber. I'm going to stick to the Protestant ethics in this one, and we'll probably do a couple more Weber videos as well. So, as I said with Marx thought that the economy and the way we needed to make a living as a culture drove everything about our society and our economy, and that included things like culture and religion. And when you think of Weber and this book we're going to talk about now called The Protestant Ethic, in some ways it was written as a response to this idea of Marx's. And, to put the bottom line up front, the too long don't read, is the Protestant ethic is going to make the case that, in fact, religion and culture can drive economics. So that's the takeaway from the Protestant ethic. The second element of that is last time I talked a little bit about Durkheim and how Durkheim focused on the distinction between Protestants and Catholics, with Catholics being more community focused, more bound in by culture and obligation to their community, and Protestants, because if they disagree with the pastor, they don't have to listen to the pastor. The Protestants are all alone, talking to God on their own, and this is something that, in fact, Weber is going to. Sorry about this. The Weber is going to address as well. Okay. So, one more thing. Part of what I love about the Protestant ethic, in the same way that, as an idea, Durkheim's anomie is useful far beyond just thinking of sociology, and Marx's model of a system whose internal contradictions will lead to its eventual disruption. With Weber, I see this Protestant ethic as a cultural model that I see almost everywhere. Holy Moses, my computer is loud. I'm all over the map today. And Protestant ethic. So when you think of of really anything. The person who hates on poor people, or the people who have no sympathy for fat people because they just need to get over their shit and solve their problems. You're seeing hints of the Protestant ethic that we're going to talk about today. So, one of the first things that you have to nope, let's not start there. Let's start with the framework. So the Protestant ethic, if you boil it down to its basic elements, are number one, you work really, really hard. Number two, you do not enjoy the benefits of that work. What you really want to do is you want to reinvest whatever you get back into your work project. And yeah, there you go. That's really it. And then when you get to the end, number three, you go back to the beginning and you work really hard and you don't enjoy the benefits and you reinvest that back in. In a nutshell, that's it. But so Durkheim, Weber is looking at the Calvinists of the early American era, 1700, and Ben Franklin's going to play a role in this story too. And he's seeing people who are believe in predestination, right? Now, the theological idea of predestination is because God exists outside of time, and because none of us as humans actually deserve to go to heaven. The only way you get saved is because it's a gift God gives to you. Because God gives this gift, because God exists out of time, as we humans understand it, who these people are is decided long before you were born, right? It's not like you can do something in Shazam. Anything you do is going to surprise, an all-knowing God, right? So long before you were born, whether or not you were going to heaven or hell was predetermined, predestined, and in some accounts of Protestantism, the number of people being saved is actually pretty small, right? I don't remember. Yeah, there we go. So now, even though you don't know if you're saved or not, you can, according to Weber's interpretation of the Calvinists of the 1700s, you can get a glimpse or maybe a hint of whether or not you are among the saved following this logic. So if God has decided to send you to heaven, clearly that's a gift God has given you, and that's a gift for the afterlife. Now, if God is giving you a gift like that for the afterlife, so the thinking goes, it's not entirely unlikely to assume that God would have given you some gifts in this life, right? And so if you were that Calvinist believing in predestination, you would work under this understanding, or live under this understanding, that you may not be saved, which would be very sad for you, but you're kind of always looking to see, is my business going well? Is my life going well? Are there hints of God's gifts for me in my life at all? So the second element of that is, and you hear more talk of this with the Protestants and the Catholics, but there's this notion of God's plan, which sounds like a Drake song. And why is that? Well, one of the most significant elements of Luther nailing his theses on the door in 1517 was not the demotion of clergy, but the promotion of everybody else, right? And what do we mean by that? Well, if you go to Catholic Church nowadays, even now, it wouldn't be surprising to have someone say prayers for vocations. And by that they mean young men to join the priesthood, mostly, because there's a little bit of a shortage of that, but also, for women to join the sisterhood, but mostly for young men to join the priesthood. And so that would be a vocation. You're called to do God's work. There's also embedded in Catholicism, and I'd have to look to find the theology that this is based on, but the idea that that if you're doing God's work, if you're clergy, you're actually closer to God than all the rest of us. Now, when you take the theology of the Virgin Mary and layer that in, Jesus is born without Mary having had intercourse, right? So there's this undercurrent of sex is a little too bodily, a little too human for the Catholic Church. And as such, these clergy who are closer to God, who are theoretically at least celibate, they're kind of better humans than all the rest of us. So the rest of us Catholics, we have jobs, but the clergy, they have vocations. Now, for Luther, he was like, that's just not the case. Clearly the clergy are important, but then so is everybody else. And so you won't hear it really with Catholics so much, but elsewhere you will hear about vocation being kind of whatever your work calling is. And if you want a modern example of this, just go listen to old episodes of Dave Ramsey's radio show, where he's talking about, you get a job to pay your bills, but you need a vocation, a career to do, what you're really meant to do in this life. And how are you going to know that it's the right thing? You're going to be making more money. It's going to be easier. You're going to like it better. Okay, there we go. Now, the second part of that, and this is where the God's plan thing comes in, if we accept that all work is noble and close to God, and not just the clergy's work, then that means all work is ordained by God, right? You don't get modern society without garbage men and plumbers. You simply don't. Civilization ends in about 3 weeks without garbage men and plumbers. You simply have to have it. Yes, we need doctors, and yes, we pay them a lot, but sometimes we overlook kind of the basics. And so if the world as God designed it needs garbage men and plumbers, then for somebody, a garbage man and plumber is the right calling for them. And regardless of whether or not one thinks it's one's calling in life, truly, because of the importance, like I said, to modern society, garbage men and plumbers really are noble jobs, whether or not you want to do them, whether or not we give them their due respect. They're important jobs, right? Okay. So what this means is when you do your work diligently and well, you are serving God, right? You're honoring, it's almost like prayer to do your job really, really well. So for Weber, he's looking at these kind of individual Calvinists way back then who have this psychological tension of they want to be saved, but they don't know if they are. So they're looking for hints. And while you can't work your way into heaven the way not by works, but by grace, that's the kind of people they are. So you can't work your way into heaven, but you do honor God by working. And if you work really hard and play your cards well, and maybe your business starts to go better and you start to see signs of prosperity. And so then maybe you are God's favored, right? So you've got this treadmill and this inner tension that drives you to work really hard for a couple of reasons, right? Because A, you've got this tension I don't really know, and B, it's how I serve God, and if I do it right, then maybe I do well, and then, okay. So the next part about that, so that's the work really hard part, and in so doing, you're serving God, but you're also maybe driving the things that are going to let people know whether or not you're getting into heaven, whether you're among the elect. The second part is the asceticism, the denying yourself. So when we used to live in Pennsylvania, there was some place that was an old monastery of some flavor. I have no idea what. And they had nowadays it's a tourist place. It's not an active monastery. And they're on the billboard on the side of the road to encourage people to come. They showed a 4x4 block of wood, and underneath it said pillow. So these old time monks were so hard-assed that they slept on concrete beds in their chambers, and they used a block of wood for a pillow, which just sounds terrible to me. But for those old timers, they weren't trying to be comfortable. They were in fact trying to be. They were eschewing comfort, and so. And you see elements of that in lots of religious communities today. My college was attached to a Benedictine monastery, and the monastery has plenty of money, beautiful land, beautiful buildings, but the actual individual monks, yes, they actually do have Birkenstocks and they do have black robes, but they live in what's essentially a dorm room, and they don't have a ton of personal possessions. And when somebody died, the hearse is the black pickup that the monastery uses for grounds work, and the coffin is a literal pine box that was made on the campus there. They are trying to live simple, unadorned, not particularly comfortable lives. It's you're denying yourself comfort. And so, okay, so if you're working as hard as I described in step one, you're probably getting a little bit of extra money, right? If you take that extra money and go spend it on a PlayStation, that's enjoyable, but it's enjoyable, right? Some of those old-fashioned Protestants didn't like music. Lutheran churches have very little decoration compared to Catholic churches. If you're not spending your money on decorating, you're not spending your money on music and toys and PlayStations, then, but you are working all the time, well, that does two things. One, not having a PlayStation, not having a TV gives you a few more hours of work during the day, right? So you come home from work, you have your dinner of, I don't know, gruel, and then you're not going to play PlayStation, you're not going to watch TV. You may well just do a couple more hours of work, or read a book that's about work, right? Everything's about putting back into your work. Well, now you've got this money growing up, this pile of money, because you're not spending it on stuff. What do you do with that money? Well, you dump it back into what you're doing. If you own your own business, you put your money into expanding that business. If you're a tradesman, you get better tools so you can work faster. If you're a wage earner but you've got extra money, maybe you buy investments. I don't know, but essentially you're not using any of that money or very little of that money to enjoy yourself. You're putting it back into the things which are going to build your prosperity that may suggest you're one of the elect, right? And so for Weber, when he's talking about the Calvinists, he's not talking about getting rich. He's seeing this as an entirely religious kind of thing. But here's where this gets tricky. And I've read that he uses the term the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism in the terms of spirit, almost like a ghost, but it's what animates American capitalism. It's the spirit. And so why is that? Well, that's where we may talk a little bit about Ben Franklin. So Ben Franklin wrote, among other things, Poor Richard's Almanac. And when you hear all of those little aphorisms about money, a stitch in time saves nine, the early bird gets the worm, early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Those are all, a surprising number of those do come from Little Richard's Almanac. And they're all little statements about money, right? Almost moral statements about money. And what Weber is suggesting happened is in that period of 1700s and 1800s America, where the U.S. was so very strongly religious, but also had this wide open, crazy economy, that the helping make you wealthy element of the Protestant ethic, eventually it didn't go unnoticed, number one, and number two, it eventually became getting wealthy as the American ethic, divorced from the religious component. So that when you have Ben Franklin writing these little moral aphorisms about how to live your life, what's the purpose? The purpose is to get wealthy. So if you are not religious at all, but you want to improve your financial well-being, what is going to be the way to do it? Well, the answer is going to be you need to find a job and you need to work your ass off, right? When you start bringing that money in, you don't blow it on comforts and enjoyment. You pile it up and start spending it on, some sort of investment. If it's the kind of thing to get you moving towards the career you want so you can make even more money, that's great. If you're putting it into your 401k, that's great. If you're buying, stocks on Robinhood, sure, whatever. But the point is that you're working hard, and instead of enjoying the fruits of that, you're reinvesting it and making money that way. So like I said, this is Weber's response to Marx, because Weber's saying here is a religious idea that jumped, almost like a virus jumping species, that jumped from religion, this model of thought jumped from religion to how to get rich in America, and retained all of the same structure, just none of the God. Or rather, the God was replaced with money, which is in and of itself fascinating. The second thing is, people will sometimes talk about Americans being kind of puritanical, and they mean, often they mean it's, we're fairly prude. We get nervous in dressing rooms at the gym. We don't want to get naked. We don't want to sit in the sauna naked. We get kind of funny about sex on TV, but, we show murder shows which have all sorts of violence, but, not a boob, not on TV. Oh my God. I would actually say that when we say Americans are kind of puritanical, I would actually prefer to think about it in terms of what I just described. So I started this whole thing saying, think about the kind of people who have no empathy for the poor. I don't know what happens to make you a beggar on the street, but if I was the kind of person who just found those people disgusting, I would say, get a job. I mean, it's like a Gen X song from the 90s, but it has the F word in it. I would say, get a job, you effin slob. And, they need to get a job. I don't need to give them money. I don't need to support whatever they do. I expect that they're either lazy, they're not willing to work hard enough, or they're drug addicts. They're spending all their money on alcohol and or meth or something. They're not working hard. They're not using their money wisely, and so their outcome is miserable, and I don't have to concern myself with it. It's the same thing when you think about the way we are towards people who have weight issues. Although there is right now kind of a pushback and a body positivity movement, but that aside, how often do you see people being really, really harsh on overweight folks? Now, and instead of thinking of it as a as a health problem or a science problem, how is it that everybody's fat now, but in 1950 nobody was fat? Because people certainly weren't running Ironmans and doing Spartan races in the 50s. So what changed, right? For me, that's like just begging for a sociological understanding. Something about society changed and it's affecting us. But for the people who have no empathy for fat people, they'll say it's easy to, we all know how to lose weight. And you can pick up a Cosmo magazine at the grocery, although people don't really do magazines anymore. But if you open it up, it's going to be, here's how you eat less, here's how you exercise more. Well, break that down into what I just said. So number one, if you want to lose weight, everybody knows, and I say everybody knows, I don't actually think this is all true. It's a criticism of kind of conventional wisdom, but everybody knows that you need to eat less, or you need to, let's start with, you need to work out, right? And if you need to get up and walk, and once you can walk far enough, then you need to start running. We need you to lift weights. And someone will say, oh, I just don't have time in my life for that. I've got kids, I've got a job. We don't care. If it was important to you, you'd figure out how to do it. Well, this attributes perfectly to the work really hard part of Calvinism and American capitalism that Weber is pointing to. The second thing, you shouldn't be enjoying yourself, period. So if clearly fat people are eating too much, again, by conventional wisdom, I'm assuming that they're enjoying French fries and potato chips and ice cream and Twizzlers and all of the wonderful food. So I'm actually saying, you're being a little bit gluttonous. You're enjoying the fruits of this world we live in the same way that the person who works and then takes their money and spends it on a PlayStation, well, that was a stupid thing to spend your money on. Well, if you are worried about your weight and you're eating, this food that's not good for you, clearly you're putting your enjoyment, your comfort over your long-term outcomes, right? And so because we look at these things like not having enough money or being overweight as individual problems, then, clearly I don't have to worry about it. Like, my life's okay. I'm satisfied with my health. I'm satisfied with my financial position. And, I worked really hard and I denied myself. And so, I got the outcome that I deserve and that I expect. And if you got a different outcome, that's on you. That's kind of the logic of that Protestant ethic. And when you turn it around and you say, well, okay, but again, are there social influences on poverty? Absolutely there is. If you were to go to, all you have to do is start reading a little bit of economic history, and it's abundantly clear that there are social aspects to poverty. If you are an Appalachian mountaineer when the railroads come in, and 2 generations, 3 generations later, your children are still getting black lung disease and everybody in the region is poor, that's not an individual failing if everybody is poor. Like, there was something structural going on there. That's just one example. And it's the same thing, like the same thing with weight. If 50 years ago, people weren't all fat, and now they are, then it's clearly not an individual problem. It's a social problem. Now, even if you find yourself as an individual human stuck in these worlds, you got to act as an individual. So, you do got to figure out how you're going to handle these problems. But that's a different thing. That's not a sociological analysis. That's a how do I act in this environment analysis. So that is the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. I like it, like I said, because first of all, I think that the structure of thought that it gives us or allows us to see is so common in the way we Americans think of many problems that I find it useful. Number two, I get a kick out of it because of the actual kind of theology underneath it, because I'm a nerd that way. And number three, because that whole conversation is, like I said, ensconced in a continuing discussion with Marx about, does economy drive culture, or does culture drive economy, or is it a reciprocal relationship? It's all a lot of fun. Okay, that's good for now. Thank you.